Don't Depend on Daddy is an unfiltered safe space, empowering young professionals to build independence in their 20s and beyond, whether it be personal, professional, or financial. Regardless of your age, relationship status, or job title, the most consistent person in your life is you. So join me and let's build our independence together. Enjoy! Hello and welcome back to Don't Depend on Daddy, the podcast. My name's Michela. I am your host, and we are back this week for the highly requested life update Ask Michela Q&A style episode. I'm super excited. These are some of my favorite episodes to record just because it's an opportunity for me to catch up with you. And I'm really excited to do that because it's definitely been a while. I have questions here that span personal, so really most of these are related to my move. I have some career questions and I also have some personal finance and money questions. So I'm going to go through all of these questions in order. If you're curious about the questions that I'm going to answer, they are all in the show notes or the description of this episode. So feel free to skip through if there are parts that you are most interested in. Before we get into the bulk of the episode, I'm going to quickly run through my regular housekeeping. So first things first, as always, as a podcast listener, you can get $10 off the Personal Finance Dashboard, my signature financial planning tool, with the code podcast1. This is a never expiring podcast only code. And this is a tool that I have used to manage my money for the majority of my 20s, the last over 5 years. I created this template back in 2019. I made it for sale in 2020, and it has helped me grow my net worth from negative $30,000. I paid off all of my student loans. I built up my savings to $100K using this template, and then I have since grown my savings and my net worth to almost $1 million. And I'm on track, hopefully, if all things go to plan, to reach a 7-figure net worth by my 30th birthday next summer. So hopefully that goes to plan. I'll be using the PFD to make it happen. I also wanted to let you know that I am in the process of working on a lower cost, less involved, a little bit more beginner focused budgeting template. So that will be available by the end of 2024. So just a couple more weeks. And if you're interested in that, make sure you're clued in on my Instagram. I'll definitely talk about it here on YouTube and on the podcast as well, but definitely clue in on Instagram. All of my Instagram details as well are in the show notes because that's where I'll be doing the most up-to-date announcements on the availability of that. The other quick thing before we move on to my books is I do want to let you know I'm also going to be hosting some year-end financial planning, putting together your plan for next year masterclasses. So if that is something you're interested in, if you need a little bit of accountability to actually sit down and go through your finances and put together a budget and set some goals for next year, I'll be hosting some masterclasses for that. They're not going to be expensive. I'm going to price them just so that they cover my costs to administer it. So clue in again to my Instagram if that is something that you are going to be interested in. Moving on to my books, as always, you can get a copy of either of my books, Own Your Money or Own Your Career. These are, in my opinion, some of the best money and career books on the market because I wrote them to be very tactical and very practical. So there's not a lot of fluff in there. I share my own experiences, navigating my career, figuring out my financials, building out my side hustle. And they're really, really helpful books for anyone in your life looking to just take their either financial or professional power back going into the new year. So really awesome gifts. If you're looking for a gift for someone, you can get the hardcover copy or the physical copy of the book, the audio book, or the Kindle ebook version for either of those. So all of that information as well is in the show notes. So with that, let's get into the Q&A. So like I mentioned, I have some personal questions. I have 5 personal questions. I have 5 career questions. And I also have, I think I have 4 money questions. So I'm going to go in that order and we're going to start with the personal. So if you're not interested in this personal section, feel free to skip ahead to the career section. But the personal questions were all mainly focused around my move and what's going on, what's the update there. So the very first question here is, when are you moving to Chicago? Because you've moved out of LA, why are you on Cape Cod? So the TLDR on this is my original plan was I was going to be moving out of LA at the end of November. And then I was going to go to Chicago for the first week of December to find an apartment. And then I was going to come home for 2 or 3 weeks for the holidays and then move on January 1st. So that didn't happen, obviously, because my apartment building had to get fumigated. And I was notified of this fumigation at the beginning of, or at the end of October going into November. Luckily, I was able to move my move up because I just didn't want to deal with all of the logistics and like there was a lot of things going on with the fumigation and the termites. And yeah, there were termites in my apartment. I don't think I mentioned that. But yeah, there was a lot going on with that just made me a little bit uncomfortable. It's not really a super safe thing to do. I know there's going to be like some people think it is, some people think it isn't. For me, it wasn't something I was comfortable with. I was able to move my move up. And so what I ended up doing is I moved out on election day, actually, which was a little bit of, honestly, a good thing because I wasn't really clued into what was going on because I was so focused on my move. And then I spent a week at my friend Ellen's house or her apartment in LA just because I still had like my rounds to do. I wanted to say goodbye to all my friends. And since I had moved my move up, it just felt so rushed. So I spent a little bit of extra time in LA. I then went to Washington to go visit my sister. She lives there with her husband, and I just visited with them for about a week. And then my sister and I went to Chicago, where I did, in fact, find an apartment. So I'm super excited about that. My lease for my apartment starts on December 22nd. Obviously, since that's like basically Christmas, I'm not going to be going exactly on the 22nd. I'm going to be going probably a few days after Christmas. And yeah, after Christmas, I'll be moving to Chicago into my apartment. I'm super excited about it. And we're going to start the new year fresh in my new city, in my new space, and I can't wait. The next question here is, what are you most excited about for Chicago? So a couple of things I'm really excited about is first being just like ease of life in a city, like a real city instead of LA. Not that LA isn't a real city, but I feel like LA is a unique city in that it's a really, really big populated city, but since everything is so spread out, it feels like a suburb. So in Chicago, I just think that my day-to-day life and doing things and accessibility is going to be a little bit easier. Obviously, it's going to be a huge adjustment because of just being in a city like that. I'm in like more of a high-rise style apartment. You know, I'm not going to have my car. It's just going to be a totally different experience, but I'm really, really, really excited about it because when you live in a walkable city, in a more accessible city, it's just so much easier to like make plans, to see your friends, to do things on a whim. Where in LA, I just felt very isolated and alone because doing plans and like seeing your friends and stuff is just so much harder. Like the threshold for doing things is much more difficult, and it actually made me less motivated to be social because it just felt so difficult. So that's what I'm most excited about moving to Chicago is just ease of life and accessibility. The other few things I'm excited about are first, seasons. So the big controversy here is everyone on the internet, specifically my Instagram and my TikTok, is very worried about the fact that I'm moving to Chicago in the winter. I am looking forward to the seasons. It's a reason why I chose a city like Chicago because they do have all four seasons. I obviously considered as well like the winter time and the cold as part of that decision. I'm from New England, so I grew up in cold weather. I do think Chicago is like a little bit more wintry and a little bit more Arctic, so I am a little bit nervous for that, but I'm not worried about it because I've experienced the winter before. I also really like the winter. I know that that's a hot take, and it might sound surprising because since I lived in LA, like I didn't really experience the winter for a couple of years, but I enjoy the winter. I enjoy the hibernation. I like cold weather because I like being cozy. I like being bundled up. I prefer winter fashion. I think it's really refreshing. I don't love like the super, super bitter cold, so I'm a little bit nervous about that, but the apartment that I'm living in has everything that I really need on a day-to-day basis inside. So if it's below freezing, like 0 degrees or less, or the wind chill is super low, like I can just do everything I need to do in my apartment building for a day or two, and I'm not worried about it at all. The other couple of things I'm excited about are like having some new routines. I think changing up your routine, changing up your environment can totally change how you feel about your life, which not to say that I've been like upset about my life or anything. I mean, I've kind of alluded to that a little bit on the pod, but just in general, I was feeling very stuck. I feel like I outgrew a lot of stuff I was doing in LA and I outgrew that environment. And I'm really excited for this new environment. I'm excited to make some new friends. I'm excited to hopefully feel a little bit fresher in terms of creativity and content and work because every year at the end of the year, I get a little bit stressed, I guess, about work just because when you're self-employed and like everything is reliant on you, like your financial success is kind of a direct result of the work that you put in. At the end of the year, even if I had a good year, which I did have a good year this year, I get stressed going into the next year of like, is this the year that the other shoe is going to drop? Like, is this the year that everything stops and changes? And in the past, I had that stress, but it wasn't necessarily real. Where this year, I'm feeling like it's a little bit more real. Like, I basically reset at zero every year, and that gives me pause. And I don't know, I'm just a little bit stressed business wise going into next year. So I really do think that having some fresh energy, a fresh environment, a fresh space, a fresh city is going to make a big difference for me in terms of just feeling excited about content and feeling excited about my job, which is really essential when your job is you online. So those are the things that I'm most excited about. I'm also excited because I have some friends in Chicago who I miss a lot. And, when you don't live in the same city as your friends, obviously nurturing and maintaining those relationships is more challenging, especially as an adult when everyone's in different phases of life. So I'm excited to have those relationships be closer relationships again and just nurture those friends and make some new friends. The next question here is, what are you doing with your car? So if you don't know, I have a car. I bought in 2021, before I moved to California, a Jeep, a two-door Jeep. I paid cash for it. It was a 2018 used Jeep. I think it had like 20,000 miles on it. I got a really great deal. And I love my car. I've always wanted to have a Jeep and I'm not selling it. I do know that when people like move to cities, they sell their car because they don't need it. I don't have a car payment on this because I paid cash when I purchased it. So I've never had a car payment on it. And I don't want to sell it, quite frankly. Like it's not something that I think I'm ever going to sell. I'm just going to keep it forever until it dies. So luckily, my parents have space for me to leave the car at their house here on the Cape for as long as I need to. I'm not taking it with me right when I move to Chicago just because I don't think I'm going to use it a lot. And the parking is really expensive. It's like $300 a month to park your car. I know there are ways around that, like you can do like a Spot Hero or parking external of your building or whatever. And I'm going to explore that. But I'm going to challenge myself to go carless for ideally like 6 months to a year and see how I adjust. I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal because, like I said, I don't think I'm going to need it. It's a totally different style of city versus LA. And the area that my apartment is in is very central. So, like, I'm not worried about accessibility or needing to get places with a car. So, yeah, I'm going to be keeping my car here on the Cape and we will see if I do end up bringing it to Chicago. The next question here is, it honestly, like, it kind of hurt my feelings. I think I've just been sort of in like a shitting on LA era the last couple of weeks because I'm moving. And quite frankly, I'm so upset about leaving California that like, if I don't talk myself up about it a little bit, I'll regret it. But basically this next question is there anything that you're going to miss about living in LA and living in California? And my honest to God answer is yes. I think about it every day. I miss it every day. I feel emotional even talking about it. I loved living in LA. I think there were, as with any place you live, certain issues, right? Like the lifestyle in LA, I really love. I loved the nice warm weather all year long. I felt like I could live my life to the fullest all year long. Whereas, in New England and in Chicago, like the winter, it's gray. It can get depressing if you don't do things to really mitigate, the winter blues. All that to say, I felt very alone in LA. I love my friends, obviously, but I just really felt like I didn't have a core group of people who I could rely on and who would always be there. And that's not to say that my friends there aren't of high quality and aren't, there's some of them are some of my closest friends, but the city itself is not conducive to having a really tight knit community because unless you live all in the same very close neighborhood, seeing your friends on a regular basis is incredibly difficult. And I just felt like at this point in my life, like I really want to have community. I want to have ease of life and accessibility. And I also want to be able to date. And the dating in LA, I know the dating is bad everywhere. So I'm under no misconception that like dating can and might be very hard in Chicago. But the culture of men there, quite frankly, I'm going to be super honest, is just not what I'm looking for. So, yeah, I do think that in terms of just like long term values of people, dating prospects, and friends that I align with, I'm much more aligned in Chicago, in the Midwest, and on the East Coast. And that is a huge factor. If honestly, it's like kind of the most important factor, in my opinion, when it comes to the place you live, because if you don't have people somewhere, it's just a city, right? So there are lots of things that I'll miss about LA. And I've definitely said this so many times, like I'm heartbroken over the fact that this was how things have turned out, but it is what it is, right? And I think it's super important to make hard decisions for yourself when you know it's the right choice and sort of push yourself to do it. I knew that if I didn't bite the bullet, it was just going to be harder and harder to do it. And there was no really real scenario where I stayed there anyways. So, yeah, I will miss lots of things about LA. I will miss lots of things about California, but I'm going to go back and visit. And just because a place isn't where you live forever doesn't mean it's going anywhere. It doesn't mean I can't go back there. Like all my friends are there. So I will be back to visit probably more than once every year. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to go back sometime in the spring. Moving on here, we're going to get into some of the career questions, which I'm excited about because I think the job market right now and just like the career landscape is super weird. I think it's weird for people in traditional jobs. I think it's weird for those of us who are self-employed. Like the dynamic of how businesses are running is a little bit different. Obviously, we have a new administration coming in, so that's going to impact things. And there's a lot of uncertainty going on. So I did get a lot of career questions. I did my best to narrow them down to the ones that I got most frequently. So the first one here is, what tips do you have and what should I do if I've been unemployed for a year? And I think this, not idea, but like this concept of being unemployed for an extended period of time is very, very normal. And I believe in some scenarios, I don't know all, I've never experienced this, that you can only collect employment for about 6 months, depending on what state you live in. So if it's been a year after that 6-month period, like I don't know if you can collect anymore. So my first tip here would be if you're outside of that window where unemployment isn't an option, get a part-time job. I think even if you qualify for unemployment, if you're not getting enough to live, I would recommend getting a part-time job anyways instead, because getting a part-time job can be so unbelievably valuable for more reasons than just the financials, especially if you are unemployed from like a traditional 9-to-5 job. So first being that a part-time job will help provide structure in your day and a sense of purpose. I think a big reason why so many people struggle with unemployment for extended periods of time beyond just the fact that like it's really unfortunate, it's an unfortunate situation, is that they feel purposeless. Like, what am I here for? What am I doing? When you have a part-time job, you have purpose again. You have a reason to get up. You're on a schedule. You have a place to be. You have people you're interacting with. So from a social standpoint, I think it's essential. And just from like, again, a purpose standpoint. But the other reason why I think getting a part-time job can be really great is because there are so many different types of jobs that you can get that in any other scenario, if you like went to college and you pursued a specific career you may not choose to pursue, it allows you to explore a passion. So for example, a big passion of mine and like my next business venture, eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, is I really want to open a coffee shop. I've always wanted to do this. I've always had a passion for coffee. I'm really inspired by the Nitro Bar in Rhode Island and how they've just totally created this like local coffee empire. It's so interesting too because my neighbors in Cape Cod are actually, they own like a local coffee chain here and they have a farm and they have horses and like I just can't, that's my dream. Like I really want to have coffee shops. I really want to have horses and land, and I just think it's so interesting that the universe or God or whoever placed someone living the exact life that I want to live right next to me so that I could see that it's possible. So for me, for example, like I said, that's a passion of mine, and I'm very highly considering, I'd say more likely than not, getting a part-time job at a coffee shop when I move to Chicago as a barista so that I can learn the business and explore that passion and see if it's something I even truly want to do, as opposed to it just being like this idea that I've had in my head. So I think it's really cool if you are given, obviously the circumstances can feel unfortunate, but if you are in a position where you're unemployed, you're having a hard time getting a job, and you have a passion or an interest, getting a part-time job that aligns with that can be really valuable. And you don't know if it could open up different career opportunities down the line. So like the barista is an example, maybe being a fitness instructor. I don't know. There's so many things, right? It totally depends on what your personal passions are. The other few tips that I have here is first is to start creating a schedule for applying to jobs and networking. I am a very systems and framework oriented person. So I like to set tactical goals with numbers and then go after them. So for example, it could be every week you're applying to 10 jobs per week, 2 jobs per day, and you're setting up 1 networking meeting per week. And the reality is with this is that until you find a job, you have to find a way to maintain momentum, even if it's hard, even if you feel really defeated, because that's just life, right? Like there are periods of time where things are hard and you have to push through to get out on the other side. So I think having some sort of system like this where you have weekly goals that you're reaching, benchmarks, a way to keep track of everything can be really valuable. And again, it keeps you on some semblance of a schedule, which is essential when you're existing sort of in this space of like, I don't know necessarily what is next. The last thing here is to think about taking some online courses to develop new and monetizable skills. So monetizable inside or outside of the office, right? So take some online courses, think about things like coding or programming or Excel or project management or something, things that are transferable across different types of jobs, different companies, different industries, but you can get certified and put that on your resume, and it's another talking point, another bullet point, a keyword or something to help you stand out during the job process, the job application process, and just, again, continue to develop your skills. Because as you go through this process and maybe you get a part-time job and you work 20 hours a week, and then the other 20 hours you are networking, you're applying to jobs, and you're taking these courses, that fills your time. You're still making a little bit of money. You're exploring something you're interested in. You're keeping your skills up, and you're creating purpose in your life. And when you're creating purpose in your life and you're doing things, that's how you maintain and generate momentum. And that's what's going to get you to that next point. So I would really, really recommend doing something like this, some combination of things like this, so that you're not feeling purposeless and lost. Because that, again, like I just feel like that's how people get really defeated during these, not even lull isn't the right word, but during these transitionary periods in your career. Moving on to the next question here. What advice do you have for pivoting careers? So first is to look for internal projects at your current job. Okay, so at your current job, if you're trying to, let's say you work in tech and you want to work in marketing, this could mean that you are reaching out to people at your company, or you're having a conversation with your manager and you're letting them know like, hey, I'm really interested in this pillar of the business. And I know it's not, maybe directly related to my current role, but are there opportunities for me to get involved in different types of projects or sit in on meetings and just learn about it and meet people in those departments? Because more often than not, if you're looking to make a career pivot, it's going to be more of a lateral move. And it's a lot easier to make these lateral moves internally at your current company than it is to like blindly apply to other new companies where your experience isn't as aligned. Because in all reality, like other companies that don't know you as a person or as an employee, like if they see your application and it's tech focused and then they see another application and it's marketing focused, like why would they not go with the marketing person, right? That's just the reality of the job market right now. So thinking about how you can leverage your current position and opportunities internally would be my first tip. If that's not possible, that's when I would start thinking about either maybe taking some certifications. I mean, you should take certifications and courses anyways if you have, a career change you want to make. Because again, if your experience is in tech and you want to be in marketing, and I'm just using that as the example, you need to have some sort of applicable experience to put on your resume to be considered as a viable candidate for those types of roles. So certifications and courses are a really low stakes, low barrier to entry way to start doing that. And then again, finding some internal projects that work. a lot of these certifications, courses, trainings, etc., are offered in the workplace. So you can see if your company offers any of them or if they have any like employee resources that allow you to do that. So I remember at my last job before I quit to do Break Your Budget full time, we had like a whole employee resource website essentially where we could take different courses and we got access to Skillshare and like there were so many ways for us to continue developing as employees. I don't think a lot of people took advantage of that, but I did because I am that kind of person. Like I just love learning, I love having new skills, all that. So I actually took like social media classes on there and I learned a little bit about marketing and it really helped me with my business. So consider doing that and developing some skills to put on your resume before you even start applying for different types of jobs. And the last tip here is I would create, what I call this a comparison tree. And it's basically 2 pillars where you have your current skill set and then pull up a job description that would be like your ideal job that you want to move into and list out all of the requirements that each candidate needs to meet to be considered for that job and try to fill in the gaps because there are going to be gaps between the skills you currently have and the skills that you need. And if you lay everything out and you fill in the gaps like that, it'll be a lot easier for you to identify like, okay, these are the certifications and courses that I need to take. These are the projects that I need to be involved in. This is the conversation that I need to have with my manager. These are the bullet points that I need to put on my resume. So do that because that will help you get some sort of direction instead of just being like, oh, like I work in tech and I want to work in marketing and I don't know what to do. So those are my tips for if you're looking to pivot careers. The next question is, how do I navigate feeling lost in my career with the pressure to advance and to keep making more money? And my original, immediate answer to that question is your career is long. For most of us, it's 45 years. And it's super, super normal to hit stagnant points in your career where you're like, I don't really like what I'm doing. And is this the path that I even want to be on? It's I would say less normal at this point for you to have a super diagonal, straight edge growth in your career. And it's a lot more normal for your growth to be like a little bit up, a little bit sideways, maybe a little bit down, directly up again, sideways this way, up. Like it's not realistic, I think, to have this like perfectly straight line. So that's totally fine. I think the other thing too to think about if you're in this sort of scenario is to really get clear on what your true desire is from your career and if the path you're on is going to get you there. So a lot of times we're just emboldened to say, oh, we need to climb the corporate ladder and we need to succeed and every year we need to be getting a raise and getting a promotion. And that's an expectation that is put on us from society. Not to get like super philosophical here, but think about what you want your life to look like from a lifestyle standpoint. So, obviously we all go to work to make money. That's really the core of why we work in the first place. But think about okay, how much money does it really is really required for me to have the lifestyle I want? Do I want to have balance in my life? Do I want to live in a big city where I live in a high-rise apartment there? Do I want to live, a slower life, maybe in a smaller home somewhere off the beaten path? The income requirements for those different lifestyles are vastly different. Do you want to have work from home life balance or do you want to be in an office every day? Think about the lifestyle you want and is advancing in your career aligned with that lifestyle, yes or no? Because I would challenge you to challenge the societal expectation of constant advancement and really think about what will personally fulfill you because the career that you're in right now may be exactly what you need to satisfy your personal lifestyle desires, and advancing your career might put you in a position where your lifestyle desires are at risk because you have too much going on at work. So keep that in mind when you get into these phases of I don't know what I'm doing and I feel like the only solution is to go up. The solution might be to stay put, or the solution might be to move sideways, or the solution might be to pull back and pursue an interest outside of work. So you don't constantly have to be going up and up and up and up year after year after year. So that's my answer to that question. The next question here is, I'm a fellow work from homer. How do you decide where to live or move? I'm overwhelmed with choices. And I really like this question because for me, there were two main themes, which I talked about at the beginning of this episode: community and accessibility. So think about what you want your life to look like and what are the things that are most important to you. And list out what you do and don't like about your current life in your current city. So when I was doing this, when I was figuring out where to move for Chicago, it's like, okay, what I love about LA, I love the weather. I love the lifestyle. I love being able to drive 2 hours and I'm in a new, beautiful place. I love going to the beach. I love hiking. And that was pretty much it. When I was thinking about what I wanted, it's like, I want to be somewhere that has seasons. I want to be somewhere that's more accessible. I want to be in a city. I want to be in a place with people who share my values. And so I'm like, okay, if I'm thinking about a city that has people that I already know with, who I connect with, whatever, I already have those relationships. For me, that narrowed it down to Boston, Chicago, and New York. I knew I didn't want to move to New York. It's too big for me. And I knew I didn't want to move to Boston because I've already lived in Boston. I know what my life looks like there. It's not what I want. So Chicago was kind of like, okay, I've narrowed it down to a few cities and this is the one that seems to make the most sense for me. Let me run it through my list of the things that I'm looking for and do we align? Are there compromises I'm willing to make? And the answer to that question was yes. So you really need to think about like, what are your personal lifestyle desires and which cities fit that bill? And then you need to narrow it down based on like a pros and cons. Also, be sure to think about like city size, think about the weather, because the weather really does make a difference where you live. Think about cost of living, think about accessibility. Do you have a car? Do you want a car? Do you need a car? Is there public transportation? Think about your day-to-day expenses. Is it an expensive city at like New York, for example, or even LA, very, very expensive? Think about activities you can do that are more than just like drinking or going to restaurants and stuff. Like these are all really important things to consider when you choose a place. The last career question here is, what advice do you have for someone who is looking to start content creation? And I love this question, and I'm definitely going to start doing some more content around content creation and just starting a business and using social media to do so. I always forget, to be quite honest, that I am in the small percentage, not to toot my own horn, but I'm in the small percentage of creators who have earned over $1 million in revenue from their content business. So I feel really proud about that, but I have OCD, so I am always striving for that next level, I guess, which I need to work on. But I definitely know a lot about this at this point and I have a lot to share. So I'm going to be doing more. So if you have specific questions about content creation, social media businesses, all that, please let me know so I can make direct content about it. But a couple of my quick tips here are: first, pick out a few core topics or pillars that you enjoy sharing about or discussing. There's a lot of discourse about, do you need a niche? Do you not need a niche? I don't think you necessarily need a strict niche, but you need to identify key themes around what you're going to be sharing, because nobody has a reason to specifically care about you right from the beginning. They need to care about what you're saying. And once they're bought into your messaging, that's when their interest in you comes into play. So when I first started Break Your Budget, I only talked about personal finance. And then over time, I realized, personal finance and career really go hand in hand. And then over time, I started getting more questions about me personally and my life and where I live and what I'm doing. And that's when I started incorporating that content at a later point. But think about what are the themes you want to share. So let's say, you're really into lifestyle stuff and you want to share day in the life videos and product reviews. That's totally fine. But if you're sharing a day in the life video, you need to share tips around how do you structure your day? How do you stay focused? How do you stay productive? Why do you do things during the day that you do? How can that help or provide value to someone? So that I think is really essential. You don't have to, again, stick to one specific thing. I do think that can silo you, but you do need to make sure that you have themes around what you're sharing. Next is to think about content that you personally enjoy consuming and create content like that, but with your own little twist. So I create a lot of content that I wish existed because I do feel like a lot of, and this is my opinion, personal finance creators get a little too far in the weeds of stuff. I know they do it for an educational standpoint, but sometimes personal finance creators are too frugal for me, or they're too obsessed with saving, or they're too obsessed with debt, or whatever. And I think it's important if you go through phases where you have specific goals that you draw back and you prioritize different things. But I'm never going to be the kind of person who lives in, a drab apartment or doesn't buy quality things in the name of saving money specifically. If I couldn't afford it, that's different. But in the name of saving money, I like beautiful things. I like nice things, and I'm willing to make sacrifices in different parts of my life in order to like the space that I live in, like the way that things look, like the way that I appear. And I don't think there's a lot of finance creators who take that angle. And so I am creating finance content, but from the angle that I would like to consume it from. So think about how you can create content with your own perspective, because that's what people are interested in. They're interested in your perspective, your strategies, your methods. And I do think that because I have my strategies and my methods and, the things that are important to me, which are financial accountability and intentional spending and really thinking about financial routines and a beautiful spreadsheet, like that is why my business has been successful. The other two quick things here are a little bit more tactical. First being, make the barrier to create content low. So use your iPhone, find a tripod that works for you, find a comfortable spot to record, and create one video per day or one piece of content per day and make it easy for you to do it. So when I was in my apartment in LA, a lot of my content on TikTok was me talking about things while I made my coffee. I was already making my coffee, so it was easy for me to do that. So think about how you can make the creation of content easy, because if it's not easy, you're not going to do it. So those are my tips for getting started with content creation. If you have additional questions, please let me know, because I'd love to make more content about this. But I guess I'm struggling with where to start on it because there's just so much to talk about. Okay, we've made it to the last section of this Q&A here, which is the personal finance and money section. This is why I always say I gotta just get right into it on these episodes, because they always feel so long. So I have 4 money questions here that I am going to answer. The first one is, how do you control your temptation, or just the temptation in general, to splurge? So I have been working on this for a long time, and I have 5 key things here that I think are really important to remember. First is to identify your spending triggers. So what's leading to this temptation in the first place? More often than not, it's emotional, but it could be, I think when we think about emotional spending, generally we think about it as like, oh, I'm sad or depressed, like let me go buy something. But another emotion is competition. And I think that the competitive desire to spend is what is triggering a lot of people online. Let me know if you agree with this, because I don't necessarily think that the splurging and like impulse spending that's happening online is a result of people emotionally spending. I think lately it's a result of people competitively spending and feeling this need to keep up. And I don't think we're talking about that enough, because in the past, like I even remember before COVID, I lived in Boston. TikTok didn't really exist, at least definitely not in the way that it exists right now. I guess the app existed, but we weren't using it how we're using it now. And I was never really thinking about, maybe it was too just me, but I was never really thinking about clothes. I was never really thinking about like makeup and hair stuff. Like my, I guess not obsession, but just interest in appearances in that way didn't exist. And I do think that TikTok and the accessibility of aesthetic and of seeing what other people are buying and wearing and doing has created this over shopping and overconsumption trend, which isn't all that, groundbreaking, right? Like I'm not the first person to think that, but I do think that splurging and impulse shopping is now more of a result of competition than it is necessarily soothing your emotions. So that's number 1, is really think about what are your spending triggers and be honest with yourself, because if you feel like you're buying things you don't need because you want to keep up as it is a competition, that is something that once you recognize, you can really be like, oh, well, it isn't a competition. Like I don't need to compete with people that I don't know over things that don't matter. Moving on to number 2 here is to make sure you are tracking your expenses. I know that I sound like a broken record when I talk about tracking your expenses, but the benefit of doing this is more than just knowing what you're spending on and where your money is going. It's also accountability. So I hold myself accountable to my purchases because I track my expenses and because I track my expenses manually, which I think is essential if you are either on the beginning of your financial journey or if you are working towards a goal, whether that goal is like a physical, I want to save, invest, or pay off a certain number, or if your goal is, I really want to rein in the way that I spend my money and realign how I'm using my money. So tracking your expenses is key. Next is to implement some psychological barriers. So this could be unsubscribing from emails so that you're not seeing shopping and sale emails. It could be unfollowing influencers who only provide shopping content and then as a result lack value in what they're sharing. You could follow the 48-hour rule, so implementing like a 48-hour waiting period before you go and purchase something. It could be you browse in person and you buy online, meaning that you don't buy something just because you saw it in person. So having some psychological barriers, psychological rules can be really helpful for controlling the urge. And that combined with tracking your expenses can make a huge difference in your spending behavior. Next are setting some financial goals, because financial goals provide motivation, they provide direction, and they provide clarity, which is so key, especially as you're making day-to-day spending decisions. If you don't have a bigger picture that you're working towards, it can be pretty challenging to have the desire or the motivation to make sacrifices or compromises in your day-to-day life. And the last thing here is to set some spending rules. So a few examples could be like each time you buy something, you also need to transfer the same amount of money into your savings account or towards whatever financial goal you're working on. And if you can't do that, then you can't afford to buy that thing. Or it could be like if you're struggling with buying clothes, it could be, you can't buy anything unless the material composition is 100% natural. Or if you buy a new piece of clothing, another piece of clothing has to go. One in, one out rule. So really think about like what are the areas that you struggle with your spending, and how can you implement some guidelines, boundaries, etc. to help mitigate that a little bit. So those are my 5 tips for controlling the temptation to splurge. I know it can be hard, but really at its root, splurging and buying things and over shopping is a behavioral problem. And the only way to change your behavior is to first acknowledge that the behavior is happening and then make regular day-to-day changes where you're holding yourself accountable in order to adjust your behavior. The next question here is, how should I prioritize paying down debt versus investing? And, this sort of ties in with this other question that I received is, should I focus on debt and then save? Both of these questions came from women in their 30s. And I think it's very interesting because recently I've been getting a lot of comments and questions of people saying that, I'm in my 30s, like, does your advice still apply to me? Can I use these tips? Are you ever going to make content for people in their 30s instead of people in their 20s? And really at its root, like everything I'm sharing is age agnostic. Like I'm not sharing specific advice you have to do in your 20s. You can adjust anything I say based off of your own timeline, because whether you're 25 or 35, the principles of what you need to do are exactly the same. You just may hopefully be making a little bit more money in your 30s than you are in your 20s. But the financial order of operations doesn't matter. If you're 21, 25, 29, 32, 37, 45, 52, you got to follow the same order of operations to sort of unlock that next threshold of, financial success, quote unquote. Maybe success isn't the right word, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So first is saving up an emergency fund, which is 3 months of your expenses in a high yield savings account. This is top priority. Your emergency fund is your financial fire extinguisher. It's so essential. This is more important than paying off debt, because if you have an emergency and you have debt, you have to incur more debt in order to cover that emergency if you don't have an emergency fund already in place. So this is number 1 priority. The second priority is paying off high interest debt. So if you have a credit card that you need to pay off, like that the interest rate is like 20%, or maybe a high rate on your car loan that's over 10 or 11%. I know that exists. This would be sort of like that first priority after your emergency fund. And the only time or the only goal that I'd recommend you balance with paying off high interest debt is saving for retirement. So that would be like 1 to 2% of your salary going into your 401k or your 403b, especially if your employer offers a retirement match on your contributions. But otherwise, paying off high interest debt is sort of like a tunnel vision goal. Get it out of the way, because it is a hard hole to get out of, especially if you're trying to balance tons of other things. Next would be increasing your investments for retirement. So let's say you don't have any high interest debt. and you only have low interest debt, you can increase your retirement contributions and sort of balance saving for retirement, saving for other short term savings goals that are maybe more cash based. So, like a wedding, a vacation, a down payment, a car, and balance that with paying off your lower interest debt. You don't have to choose one or the other, especially if your debt is like the 3%, 4%, 5%. Like the threshold should be 7 to 8%. So, if your debt is over 7 to 8% interest rate, I'm talking about your interest rate, is over 7 to 8%, that's where it sort of crosses that threshold of it costs more for you to have that debt than what your money could make long term in the stock market. So it makes more sense, or your money has higher utility paying that debt off than it does working in the markets. But if your interest rate is lower than that, then basically the utility of your money goes further by deploying it in the market as opposed to just like tunnel visioning that debt. So that would be like my recommendation in this scenario is really look at the interest rate on your debt. If it's high interest, focus on or put the majority of your focus towards paying down that debt. If it's lower interest, you can balance it with other goals. And there's no perfect script for this, right? Like maybe you have a year where you're not saving up for anything and you have your emergency fund, you can put more money towards your debt. Or maybe you have a year and you just got engaged and you're just making those minimum payments on your debt while you save up for your wedding. Like that's totally fine. And it's why I recommend following more annual planning for your finances as opposed to like, you can have a 5-year, a 10-year, a 20-year vision, but things change tactically so much every 6 months. Like having a 1 year where you're sort of like focusing on one goal or have a specific theme, and then the next year you're adjusting based on how your life changes. It's much more agile and it's much easier to work towards different goals more simultaneously, if that makes sense. So really the big theme here is unless you have credit card debt, you should also be investing while you're paying off your other debt. The last question here is, I graduated this year and I don't have any income yet. I don't have a job. What should I focus on financially? So first and foremost, I alluded to this in the career section, but you should start prioritizing skill development and you should take some online courses, whether they're free or, lower cost, and really make sure you're enhancing your employability and developing skills and stacking things that you can put on your resume to help up your chances of getting a job. Also, make sure you're networking and stuff. So networking is generally low cost or free. Next, I would recommend that you create like a bare bones minimum budget and get in the habit of tracking your expenses. I think people think that if you don't have any income, you can't track your expenses. But if you don't have any income and you're still spending things or you're still spending money, you still need to track those expenses no matter what. You may not be able to follow like a zero-based 3-bucket budget specifically because you don't have an income, but like if you're spending money, like those expenses should be tracked, especially if you don't have any income, because you need to know how much you're spending and where is that money coming from? Is it coming from your savings? Is it coming from an allowance? That's really, really important and a habit you should get in right from the get-go. And then start taking advantage or think about, if you are able to, taking advantage of like opportunities to live at home, to stay on your parents' health insurance. Think about exploring a part-time job. I think a big thing that I see with new grads is all of this pressure to get a corporate job right away. And I understand that. And I think it's obviously very, very valuable to make sure you are applying and getting a job. I think every new grad, even if your desire is to be self-employed or to become a content creator or to have your own business, I think everyone should spend a few years in the corporate marketplace to understand how things work. Because there's so much value in having a corporate job and learning how to communicate with people and learning how to operate in that setting and having experience in learning different responsibilities and exposure to projects and how things work, because all of that is transferable when you have your own business. But I see this rush of like, I immediately have to get a job. And well, that's, the ideal scenario. The current job market isn't totally conducive to that. It's not happening for a lot of people. And it's totally okay to get a part-time job, work the front desk at a yoga studio, be a barista, become a Pilates instructor, go work retail. Like I have lots of friends who work part-time at like a Free People, and they're just picking up extra cash. They're using their free time wisely. They're creating community. Like there's so many benefits to having a part-time job. And if you are unemployed, whether you're a new grad or you're 35 or 45, get a part-time job. I think it's so important. And again, it gives you purpose, it gives you something to do. It's not 40 hours a week. It can be if you want it to be, but it's not full time. So you will still have time to apply to jobs, you'll still have time to network, you'll still have time to interview, and they're flexible. So like if it's not working for you, you can quit. Like it's not a permanent thing. So I think that that's a really important takeaway, and one that I just, I've emphasized, but I really want to emphasize. So that would be what I would focus on if I was a new grad and I wasn't getting a job or having a hard time getting a job. I would get a part-time job. And I would really focus on creating a bare bones budget. I do my best if I was able to live at home, stay on your parents' health insurance, and develop your skills while you're in this sort of waiting period. With that, I'm going to wrap up this episode. It was a little bit of a longer one. If you are at this point, thank you for listening the whole way in. I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you next week in the next episode.